Welcome everybody. Welcome to Listen, Imagine, Compose CPD session for teachers. I'm Judith Robinson and I'm from Sound and Music. I'm Head of Education. And Listen, Imagine, Compose is a partnership project. It's between Birmingham City University, Martin's here today, and also Birmingham Contemporary Music Group. And Nancy from Birmingham Contemporary Music Group is with us today as well. We've been doing monthly meets this year. And this is our third meet, and today we are looking at progress in composing. We've got a number of guests. We've got Mark Phillips from Ofsted, who's going to talk to us first about progress and planning for progress from his point of view, and then we've got a presentation by Nikki Booth, who was a teacher, I think, but is now at Birmingham City University doing some research. We'll take a little break and take a screen break halfway through. Then we're going to hear from a teacher, Mark Aitchison, about how he plans for progress in composing in his curriculum. And then we will have Ali Daubney with us, and we'll get practical at that stage and chance to think about our own curricula. So before we kick off, just a couple of housekeeping things. I think everybody knows how to do Zoom and these things by now, but just in case, if you can keep yourself on mute when you're not talking, that would be great. It just helps to keep the background noise down. And also, we are recording the session today, and that's so that people who can't be with us can see it and find out what was said later on. So as is the usual thing in Listen, Imagine, Compose, I'm going to start with Martin. I'm going to hand over to Martin, and he is going to give us some food for thought. Martin, welcome.
Hello, thank you. Hopefully I'm sharing a screen, and that is now visible. Thank you. I can see Nancy doing a thumbs up. Brilliant. So what I want to do is very briefly just set the scene, and those of you who have been to one of these sessions before know that often this scene setting is in the form of questions, and they are questions for us as a profession to think about, maybe for you as an individual, but really they're to get us going and thinking about what composing is. And so the first slide has some questions which I really think are quite important. And to some extent, I've stolen this phraseology of the second bullet from Ali Daubney, who will be along later. But the question that I ask, the first one, is what does progress look like, and more importantly, sound like in classroom music? So as Ali would say, what is year 7-y about year 7 music, and what is year 9-y about year 9 music? And the question that I'm always fascinated to bolt onto that is, can this be detected in recordings of pupil work? So if you record year 7 at some time during the first term before Christmas in year 7, and then record them again in year 8 at some point and year 9 at some point, and hopefully you're doing this rather more often than once a year, close brackets, what is it about those recordings? Can you tell whereabouts they are? Because this then leads us to replace classroom music with composing and ask exactly the same questions. What does progress look like, and more importantly, sound like in composing? What is year 7-y about year 7 composing, and year 9-y about year 9 composing? And again, can this be detected in recordings of pupils' work? So the real nub of what we're thinking about today, what does it mean to get better at composing? Because really, this is what we're thinking about when we talk about progress. A question, is progression a one-way street? Because the very, very famous Swanwick-Tillman spiral from British Journal of Music Education back in 1986 posits the idea of going up and down the spiral. So how does that, or does it, and if so, how does it affect thinking about composing? So the difference between a one-way street and going up and down the spiral, depending on what you're doing. What does it mean to get better? And then a question that I think really does need to exercise us is, can there also be progression in quality of composing? And quality of what exactly? So in other words, what gets better over time? So the question becomes, how is increasing quality of composing and compositions planned for in a curriculum? And I use the word composing and composition as separate things, one as a noun, one as a verb. So just to explore that a moment, I see composing as a process, composition as the product. I appreciate that's not how everybody sees it. But for the moment, what I would want to say is beware, this is me suddenly turning into assessment person, but beware of judging the quality of the process, i.e. of composing, by the quality of the resultant composition. And maybe particularly important for us involved in classroom music, beware of judging it by the quality of the performance of the compositions, because I see these as being very different things. And quite a tricky question is, does a good composition equal good composing? And we can also ask that the other way around. Does good composing always result in a good composition? So what I'm doing in this is separating out what I see as the potential bear traps of composing as process and composition as product. So those are the sorts of questions, and those are the things that I'm hoping I've set the scene by asking us to think about some of those really quite difficult concepts, ideas, and thoughts for the start of this session. So I'm sorry to hit you with that very large wet fish or that very large series of bear traps, but I think they're useful ways of us actually trying to engage with what we're thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Great. So there's some food for thought. And I think without any further ado, I'm going to hand straight over to Mark, who is going to talk to us from his point of view. So over to Mark. Oh, I should say as well, sorry to interrupt. So Mark's going to speak, but there will be opportunity for questions at the end, and I'll field those questions when they come.
And people can also use the chat.
Thank you, Judith. Can everyone see my screen now? Can you give me a hands up or thumbs up? Or thank you, Martin, Nancy. Good. Okay, so it's really good to be with you. Really good to be with you today. I'm Mark Phillips. Those who don't know me, I'm a senior HMI in London. I'm also national lead for music in Ofsted, and I've been doing that in this current guise for the past 6 months or so, since September. I was previously national lead for music back 10, 11 years ago, and you may know me from the Wider Still and Wider report, which came out then. And it's really good to be with you today, because part of that report includes a visit to a school in Handsworth in Birmingham with you people, with the some really interesting work on composing, and Nancy and I were talking about it earlier, and that was memorable. So it's good to be back. So you can see the title of my presentation, "Planning the Sparks that leads the flames." This year has been a really strange year for all of us, and I think I'm at the other end of my career now, really, and I think it's been the most extraordinary year I can remember in nearly 40 years in education. And I think it says enormous amounts about the dedication and passion of colleagues in music education world that you're all here today, actually, not just talk about what that is preoccupying education at the moment, but actually to talk about music and the great music we make in our schools. And so it's great to be able to be talking about music today, not just trying to justify the place of music in the curriculum, because it's good for behavior, it's good for academic achievement, but actually talk about music because it's just good to do music. Music is a good thing. And the reason why music is in the curriculum is because it's music. We don't do music just to improve behavior or academic achievement. We do it because it's worth doing in its own right. So I'm going to start today by playing you some music, and we're going to listen to a piece of Mozart. It's the fourth movement from Mozart's String Quartet in G major K387. And I hope that everyone can hear this. If you can't, do shout, but here it is. Okay, so there we are, Mozart. And Mozart, of course, was a genius. We don't assess his compositions, do we? We don't give him a mark out of 10. What we do with Mozart is we analyze his compositions. Having said that, I don't think there's anyone in the room today who would give young Wolfgang anything less than a working beyond, or a grade 9, or an A star, or even Martin double first for that particular string quartet. But the question is, how did Mozart get to that point? Because for all Mozart's creativity and his magnificence, we know there were key moments in his life and in his education that led to this work. A work composed, by the way, in 1782, when Mozart was just 26 years old. I know, makes you think, doesn't it? Mozart's sister, Nannerl, was 4 years older than Mozart, and in later life, after Mozart's death, in fact, she wrote about her brother's early music experiences, including the key role their father, Leopold, plays in introducing the young Mozart to the keyboard. And as Nannerl said, he often spent much time at the keyboard picking out thirds, and his pleasure showed that it sounded good. When he was 4 years old, his father, in a kind of game, taught him a few minuets and pieces at the clavier. He could play it effortlessly and with delicacy, keeping exactly in time. And by the time he was 5, he was already composing pieces which his father wrote down for him. When he was an adult, Mozart wrote to his sister, recounting how he had discovered the music of J.S. Bach and fugues in particular. And he wrote, I composed the fugue first and wrote it down while I was thinking out the prelude. Baron von Swieten, to whom I go every Sunday, gave me all the works of Handel and Sebastian Bach to take home with me after I had played them to him. When Constanza heard the fugues, she absolutely fell in love with them. Now she'll listen to nothing but fugues, and particularly in this kind of composition, the works of Handel and Bach. Now, thinking back to that string quartet we heard just now, there's no doubt you can hear the thirds that Mozart picked out on the keyboard as a 3-4-year-old, and the influence of Bach fugues is there for everyone to hear. Now, the music we heard is definitely Mozart. It's genius. It's inspired, but there's also no doubt that Mozart's life and his education in and around music played a fundamental role in making him the musician and the composer he was. And so an interesting question, if we had the time and a month or so, would be to ask the extent to which Mozart was an inspired genius, or the extent to which he was a product of received education. That's received through tacit knowledge acquired through the world around him, including a musical father, the procedural knowledge he acquired through his father's instruction, and his declarative knowledge he acquired through his factual learning and knowledge of minuets and fugues. So turning to the way that we assess composing work and the way we teach composing work in schools, I wonder then, to what extent we see pupils' compositions first and foremost as works of creative inspiration, or as cumulative products of their education, including the organized sequence education that we've provided or haven't provided for them in school. And so my next question is, do we assess composing or the composition, which we would call the composite product, or do we assess the way the component parts have led to the composite, the composition? Are we assessing the composing or the composition, or are we assessing what has led to the composition. Do we see assessment as assessment for learning of the pupil? Do we assess the pupil, or do we actually see this as assessment of our teaching and the quality of the education that has led to the child's composition, the pupil's composition? And of course, where in all this does creativity sit? Okay, so in my last slide just now, I talked about the composition being a composite activity. There's no pun intended there, but it does seem to me, and I get great joy out of this when I'm talking to other HMI from other subject areas, that composition in music is the perfect example of a composite in learning. So as such then, rather than seeking to make a judgment on the quality of the composite outcome to judge the composition, I think we should be looking at the component parts that lead pupils towards having the wherewithal, having the language, having the tools to make a creative response. We should be looking at their technical skills of playing an instrument. We should be looking at the way they can sing and use music technology and how that contributes to their creativity in composing. We should be looking at their technical application and abilities to apply notation or recordings. We should be looking at how their knowledge of music is constructed, how they understand the way the music is constructed, the building materials, the blocks of music. And we should be looking at the knowledge and their understanding of how all the elements of music work together in their own music and that of others to create an expressive output. So I ask the question again, when we assess pupils' composition work, what does what we hear and see tell us about the component parts the pupil has learned through our direct teaching or through their experiences? And when we assess pupils' compositions over time, from year 1 to year 9, for example, what does what we see and what we hear tell us in terms of their learning of musical knowledge over time, in terms of knowing more and remembering more in the technical side of music, in the constructive side of music, and the expressive side of music? And remember, the national curriculum makes very clear the expectations we have for the progress pupils should make. For example, in the examples I've given here, as they move through Key Stage 3. And look at that second point. There's an expectation that the pupils should show increasing sophistication in their composing work, increasing sophistication in their use of tonality, increasing sophistication in the use of scales, increasing sophistication in the use of other musical devices. And so that increasing sophistication, that deepening understanding of the expressive dimensions of music are at the heart of progress in composition, in composing. Here's another set of images to remind us that pupils' composing work is a composite. It's an end product which takes resource from their acquired knowledge in the technical side, their technical playing of instruments and singing of notation and music technology, in their understanding and knowledge of the constructive side of music, how music is built, the elements that make up music, the devices, the structures, and the expressive side of music, how those technical and constructive knowledge comes together to make an expressive output in the work themselves or the work of others. So when we're taking notice of compositions, we're taking stock of how far the pupil has come in learning technical, constructive, and expressive knowledge of music. And composing is at the heart of all those areas of musical knowledge. Our job then as music teachers is to ensure that our pupils receive good education in all of these dimensions. So assessment is the end point. But however fancy our assessment models, the way we plan our curriculum is key to ensuring that pupils learn good, incrementally sequenced musical knowledge. Now have a look at this curriculum plan for 9 terms of Key Stage 3. This is a real curriculum overview from a real school. Now, I'm not here to inspect the school today, and we should never judge a school on a single simple document like this. But if I was given this on inspection, it would certainly raise a few questions. Now, I hope once you've read through it, I wouldn't need to explain what the questions would be, but they would certainly include a question about how that curriculum model plans for pupils' use of the interrelated dimensions of music, the elements, but also how it builds with increasing sophistication their understanding, their knowledge of tonality, of different types of scale, of other musical devices. Those expectations are clearly laid out in national curriculum. How does that show increasing sophistication as pupils move from year 7 to year 9? And if it doesn't, how can we expect pupils to compose with increasing sophistication if we're not given the wherewithal in our curriculum, if we're not planning in our curriculum to give them that wherewithal to compose with increasing sophistication? How can they? How much of this curriculum here is contained with domain-specific knowledge of particular musical styles, and how much of it is concerned with building domain-general musical knowledge? Because often we see projects based on the domain specificity of gamelan, the blues, music and the media, forming a band, without thinking about the progressive incremental gaining of knowledge of musical technique, of musical construct and expressive qualities. And how does this curriculum actively plan for pupils' music and composing, as opposed to planning for assessing pupils' composition work? We've ticked the boxes. They do some listening, they do some performing, they do some composing, but how do we plan for that increasing sophistication? So that curriculum looks to me as if it's constructed on the basis of activities rather than incremental progression. And it's certainly not clear that last curriculum plan that I showed you, how the composing tasks that are set out in the plan emerge from carefully planned progression of pupils' technical, constructive, expressive musical knowledge. And that is something I would certainly want to explore with the music subject leader, and through listening to the recordings of pupils' music, their compositions over time. And I hope this slide here, which I repeat, is a useful one for you to look at when you think about constructing curriculum in school. Just to finish with them, a challenge. I don't think you should go out back to your schools and just hope that one day you'll find a Mozart in your year 9 class. I think I'd say to you, take a look at your curriculum and ask yourself, are you providing the component parts well sequenced that might give your pupils the wherewithal and the tools to become competent and then inspired composers? Because you've got to give them a curriculum that gives them a fighting chance of building those technical, constructive and expressive skills they need to become increasingly sophisticated and discriminating composers. Give them a fighting chance, but don't leave it to chance. And be prepared for the odd surprise and the odd bit of individuality too. If you go to Vienna and you go for a coffee in Vienna, which I hope you will be able to one day, you will come across a cake in the cafes called the Mozart cake. It's a great cake, a great favorite cake, and it's a magnificent cake, really. I'm going to show you some examples of Mozart cakes now and see what you think. Here's the first one. There we are. And the Mozart cake, as you can see, is a sponge cake with many layers, with cream in between, a lovely mirror icing on top, ice at the sides with some chocolate sprinkles, delicious. Okay, so that's a Mozart cake. Here's another Mozart cake here. Now, it looks to me, without the benefit of a taste test, which I'll be very happy to oblige on, of course, but it looks to me as if both composers there have understood the constructive principles of the sponge layers with the cream filling. Both have got the chocolate on. Both are technically competent to a point. It might be the cake on the left has shown a bit more ambition and finesse with the many more layers. And getting those thin layers equal and constructive will have taken some practice, I'm certain. The cake on the right demonstrates the principles of layering and can demonstrate knowledge is there, but perhaps in a simpler way. If you like, it's a 4-part texture as opposed to a 12-part texture. When it comes to creativity, the multicolored creams look interesting and multicolored sponge look interesting, but does that alone make it a more effective Mozart cake? What about this cake here? The pupils clearly understand that there are layers with cream in between, but have they mastered the technical skills? Have they been taught and have they learned the technical skills thoroughly? Do they really understand the sophisticated construct that's required for Mozart cake? And have they shown awareness of the expressive meaning that's required for a top quality Mozart cake? You tell me. Now, I'm no Paul Hollywood, as you may have noticed, so I'm going to stop there, stop the analogy. But what I would like to say to finish with is that if I was Paul Hollywood, I'd like to give every single one of you a Hollywood handshake for all the work you've done over the past year in your schools and universities in this extraordinary time. Some of the work that we've done with young people in music education has been remarkable, against and sometimes defying the odds, but always, and you know, I watch this a lot, but always observing the appropriate safety mitigation. So thank you for listening. I hope that was interesting. And I wish you well. And I hope you have a very good Easter break when it comes, with plenty of cake. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So would you like to unshare your screen?
Of course.
That would be great. And then I think we've got well, nearly 10 minutes for some questions and discussion. So I'll kind of I'll do my best to sort of ask all the questions. I can see that there are some coming into the chat already, and I guess if anybody actually would like to use the hands up, if you use the sort of proper hands up function in Zoom, then it brings you to the top of the screen and I can see you, and then you can sort of actually ask your question rather than typing it in the chat. But I'll start with the first one from Ali Daubney, just to get us going. So Ali says, the problem with the cake analogy is that to me it is all about the taste. The middle one looks a bit like a classic Daubney construction. Thank you, Mark. Everybody,
comments.
So everything and that was the comment I was going to make as well. Actually, I'm ready for a cake. but not yet. So any sort of thoughts or reflections on what we've heard? Adam has his hand up, so I'm going to go over to Adam. You can take your camera off as well, Adam. It'd be nice to see you.
Hi.
Hello, Adam.
Hi. Just a question about the curriculum map. I'm pretty sure that if you go into most schools, that curriculum map or something there or thereabouts will be kind of like the first thing that you get. Would you expect the teacher or head of music to kind of go through that curriculum map? I noticed they had gamelan first, and it was like blues next, I believe. Like, would you say like you can have that kind of map in place, but you'd say like a limited scope of a gamelan composition, and then you had like a bit more advanced chords and melody for like the year 8, and then or what was your idea of the curriculum map being wrong? Because I'm pretty sure like the schemes of work are kind of like they're bog standard anyway. I'm just interested in how else you would plan the curriculum map in that way. Would you say like texture development or melodic development going through the year? That's just an interesting thought.
Thanks, Adam. There are 2 points there, really. One shows you how difficult it is to plan a music curriculum, because we talk about the elements of music, don't we? Pitch, rhythm, so on and so forth. One of the reasons why the national curriculum talks about interrelated dimensions of music is for those exact reasons. It's impossible to separate them because they develop in parallel, don't they? We don't have Mozart 40th Symphony, the pitch symphony, 41st, the rhythm symphony. I mean, it's nonsense, isn't it? So there's the challenge. The thing with inspection, and I'm coming to inspection now as I'm here, and it's what I do, is that we would never have a fixed answer. We'd have the questions to ask. So if we went to a school where we had a plan like that, we'd say, fine, tell us how you progress pupils' knowledge of the structures in music, the constructive in music, the technical aspect of music. How does, for example, doing blues in year 8 and doing rock and roll, which typically uses 3 proper 50s rock and roll with 3 chords, how does using a 3 chords form in year 8 develop into a 3 chord form in year 9? How does that improve your pupils' harmony, their understanding of chords and harmony? And that's an interesting question. And very often, the answer I get is that's really interesting. I haven't thought of that. So how does developing, how does moving from the gamelan to reggae develop because they're very specific domains, aren't they? Very specific. So are you teaching music or are you teaching reggae? So they're questions that I would ask. Does that make sense, Adam?
Yeah.
There's no answer, but it's just
I'm just
understanding and thinking.
I'm just interested in the difference between, you have a half term, you do the blues. You have a half term, you do reggae. You have a half term, you do samba or something. But actually, I think what you're maybe coming at is that maybe actually instead of doing reggae or samba, you do texture 1, texture 2, and texture 3, or melody invention 1, melody 2, and melody 3, and using those interrelated dimensions of music or musical elements as a component map rather than the traditional samba 1, blues 1, reggae 1. I think it's just a thought point. Maybe I go back to my curriculum and say I'm not going to do samba in year 9 or blues in year 8. I'm going to do melody invention 1 or rhythm invention 2 or something. It's just thought.
I'm just thinking: is our music curricula actually driven by repertoire, or driven by language? Is that English to English language? For example, if you were to do a project, here's an idea: a project looks at cyclical bass lines, ground bass per cell. But you look at riffs in jazz, aren't you? You can think of some great rock songs that use riffs, and Passacaglia, for example. Brahms, Purcell. You can think. You're not thinking in terms of one particular musical style. You're thinking in terms of the construct, the techniques. Yeah.
I've got two people with hands up here, and I think if we see if we can cover those two questions, and then I think we might have to move on. But Peter, you had your hand up earlier as well. And there's Carol as well. Right. So Peter first.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Oops, sorry, I'm trying to take my hand down and pressing the wrong button. Never mind. You talked about I think you sort of raised this issue in your talk a little bit, but then you just asked the question about how teaching them blues in year 8, which uses 3 chords, and then teaching them rock in year 9 or rock and roll in year 9, which uses 3 chords, shows progression. And I wanted to ask the question: how do you feel about the idea or the distinction between progression as learning and using more stuff versus progression as learning and using stuff better? I think it's quite easy to give feedback to students that shows them you can develop this piece by doing more of such and such. But it's sometimes harder to give them feedback that says you can make this piece better by doing such and such. But I think being able to get better at doing a smaller amount of stuff is a very important part of development as a composer. So how do you find that balance between doing more and doing better? Or knowing better?
I agree. It is a balance. There is a balance between, not just racking up the knowledge, but actually racking up the knowledge, but also applying it well. So I think you're right. There is a balance. There's a very fine balance. But, there's an awful lot of time. There are 3 years in the Key Stage 3 curriculum, and there are 3 years in the Key Stage 3 curriculum, 7, 8, and 9.
I wish.
There are 3 years in the year in the Key Stage 3 music curriculum. But you'd asked a question about that sophistication. National curriculum sets out very clearly increasing sophistication. And so they go hand in hand, getting it right. Nobody wants the children to be playing music inaccurately or with, poor musicality, but it's building their repertoire over 3 years. So it is a balance. And I would look for a balance of both.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
3 years.
So we've got Carol and then Hannah.
So my question is, I'm just about to start to mark my year 11 compositions. And just to get back to this, I have 2 compositions back to back. One of the students has used a whole mixture of textures, melody in the right hand, melody swapping to the left hand, melody going to different instruments, correct ABA structure, everything perfect. And yet it's really not a very good composition. It just doesn't sound good. But all the components are there, like from the textbook, okay? And so technically it should get a really high mark because it is sophisticated use of all of those elements as AQA has specified. Then I have another student who has not done that at all. She does, but it's an absolutely fantastic composition, which for me would get a level 9. So it's a very difficult one to assess because one just works beautifully orally and the other one works beautifully technically. Can you talk me through that?
We could spend a whole afternoon talking about GCSE composition and A-level composing marking, couldn't we? But those 3 areas, technical, constructive, and expressive, knowing what works. And it's equal balance, isn't it, between the 3? And yes. I think what you're saying there is constructive is pretty strong, yes. Technically pretty strong, but expressively no. So it's getting those 3 things right, isn't it? Those 3 dimensions. But also when you think, let's take example of pairs. My son's viola player, and Spiegel is one of our favorite pieces. I love the piece. So simple, simple, but it works.
But it works. Exactly.
But you can't tell me Arvo pairs only knows 1 chord.
Exactly.
But it is a balance, isn't it? is a
But
balance.
I think ultimately it's got to be what works, you know.
Yeah.
So this child who's doing it technically well must get a lot of marks, you know, for using the technique, for understanding and for implementing. But ultimately, she's not as a sophisticated and intuitive musician as the other student.
It's a balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a balance. You know, the Bach fugues, the Bach double, triple, quadruple fugue we heard earlier on, genius, and it worked technically,
Yeah.
but also emotionally. What a piece!
Yeah.
And you know, but it's those 3 dimensions, isn't it?
What I'm saying is, when the one dimension is so much stronger than the other, it is obviously, and it sounds like a much better composition. Then we have to rebalance that whole.
You're talking, Carol, with the benefit of having heard it. I think if you let us all hear it, I'm sure everyone will have their view as well. But
we can't
thank you, and good luck with your GCSEs. Thank you for your work. Thank you.
Right, so we'll have one more question from Hannah, and then we will move on to Nikki's presentation. But over to you, Hannah.
Hi there. Hi, Mark. Thank you for your presentation. I was just wondering, so a lot of the references to composition were taken from classical music, and a lot of the, I mean, when you mentioned sophistication, for example, and developing ideas of tonality, and giving students the opportunity to explore that in more detail and more depth. How does non-classical music fit into that? And then composing in what can be quite different styles in terms of how you would approach a composition. How does that fit into, again, the vision for Key Stage 3? Because I think that's, again, teaching those topics allows students to engage with composition from those different angles. Yeah, I'd just be interested to hear.
It does, and you're right. You know, I chose to use Mozart as my music example, but you know, national curriculum makes very clear tonality and harmony is an important part of what we expect to teach children as they progress through from year 7 to 9. So that's got to be in there as well. But scales are in there, you know, different textures, music from around the world is all part of that. But the question I'm asking is, do we construct our curriculum based on those, to be honest with you, silos, including classical music? Or do we think about musical progression, giving children the repertoire, giving them the knowledge, the syntax, if you like, to be able to understand all kinds of music? Because, you know, it's important to teach domain-specific information knowledge, but also it's important to teach domain general knowledge as well. It's getting that balance right. And yeah, I'm not here, and it's not our job actually to tell you what the preferred style is and the preferred answer is. You know, you learn very quickly as an inspector, or you should do. You don't have the answers. You just have the questions to ask. You know, and so many times I've gone to schools and I've talked to colleagues who have explained to me how it works in their school, and it does work in their school. So, you know, we're not giving a preferred style at all. We're just asking the questions. I hope that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. That was some really interesting food for thought there. I hope it's all right, Mark, if you let me have your slides and we could put them on the Listen, Imagine, Compose website so that people can refer to them, because there were some really interesting diagrams. And I suppose, coming from my sound and music hat on, I'm delighted to see that composing is at the heart of music education. It's the beating heart.
And
yeah.
Yes, and my email address is up there, and I'm always happy to hear from me, but even though it may take a few days for me to reply. But just say thank you to everyone for your work. It's really appreciated. Not two words you often associate with Ofsted, thank you, but we mean it, we really do mean it. Thank you.
And thank you for sparing the time to come today.
Always a pleasure. So,
without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nikki. we'll take our break later than we first planned, but that's okay. We've kind of rejigged our timetable so that there's time for everything still, even though we ran over a little bit on what we planned. But welcome, Nikki. Please do introduce yourself before you and sort of say what your background is before you talk to us about threshold concepts.
Hi, yes. Well, first of all, thanks ever so much for having me. Yeah, if it's okay, I'll do the introductions on the next slide because I already planned for that. Okay. So can I just check that you can see the presentation? You can hear me? Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So thinking about the notion of progress in composing, I've been asked to speak to you this afternoon about threshold concepts and how they might be identified, how they might be crossed, and thinking that in terms of Key Stage 3 group composing. So yeah, a little bit about myself then. Well, first of all, I'm a 4-day-a-week music teacher. I also teach Spanish as well. I have a senior leadership role as head of assessments. I'm the data man, and I also do teacher development as well. On my day off, if there's such a thing, I'm also a doctoral researcher at Birmingham City University, so I'm working with Martin. He's one of my supervisors, and also do some visiting lecturer for education there as well. So that's just a little bit of a background for me. The other thing that I forgot to say on the previous slide, apologies, I'll just go back to that, is that at the bottom there's my university email address and my Twitter handle. So I'm very happy, of course, to share slides. I know it's already been said that they're going to go up on the website, but if you wanted, to talk further about some of the things I'm talking about this afternoon, then please do feel free to get in touch. I'd love to talk to you about it. Okay, so just a quick overview then, what I'm going to be talking about this afternoon. Well, first of all, exploring a little bit about the current literature base on threshold concept. Moving on to defining, well, what is it? And then linking that with identifying crossing threshold concepts in Key Stage 3 group composing, which actually some of the links with my doctoral work, although not exclusively, but there are some links with some of the work I've been doing. And then finally, of course, just to wrap up with some summary and key considerations for us music teachers in terms of group composing, which is my main focus here. So in terms of literature base, well, unfortunately, there's a fair bit around. I have explored it as part of my doctoral research, but unfortunately it's concentrated in higher education with incredibly very little for primary and secondary contexts. What there is in terms of music education, well, in my vast search, I've only been able to find 3 things. And that is one thing focusing on undergraduates' reflective writing within music, transition from secondary to tertiary New Zealand students in performance, and there's an opinion piece out there about dialogic aspects of performance as well. So in terms of what I'm talking about this afternoon, I have found nothing relating to composing or group composing. So yeah, so hopefully there's a nice contribution here, but everything that I'm saying here is very in progress at the minute. Like I say, it's partly part of my doctoral research, but like I say, there's nothing else out there that I can find at the moment. So in terms of defining what a threshold concept is, well, Eric Mayer and Ray Land were the 2 academics who sort of coined the term in 2003. And they defined it as this. They said, it can be considered as akin to a portal, opening up a new and previously inaccessible way of thinking about something. It represents a transformed way of understanding or interpreting or viewing something without which the learner cannot progress. So that's the sort of standard definition of what a threshold concept is. And what they do in their literature, I haven't done this for this afternoon's presentation, but they do go on to suggest around about 5 characteristics as to what a threshold concept might be or might look like. The problem is that in itself is problematic. And the reason why that is, other academics have said, well, this descriptive criteria, so the definition I've just mentioned here, plus also the criteria that they do go on to, well, it's just too vague. So we don't really know what a threshold concept is. And even on the second bullet point there, the academics themselves go, well, okay, we've got this list of 5 characteristics, but it's not a definitive list. You don't have to include all 5. So it doesn't have to include all of them. So the point is that at the minute, in terms of the threshold concept, even though it's been going for, since around about 2003, it's still not very clear, and there's a lot of work to be done in this particular area. So in other words, because I do find that this definition is quite useful from the original academics, they said that a threshold concept can refer to when learners, for example, get stuck at particular points in learning of their curriculum, and therefore need some sort of knowledge in order to progress. So in terms of all of this missed whatever, for learners and thinking of it in terms of the classroom-based learning, this is that particular point when learners get stuck. I find that very very useful. What the research doesn't consider, however, is that some individuals within our classes may encounter more threshold concepts than others within a lesson. And I was having this discussion, for example, on Friday on Twitter. Someone was asking about threshold concepts in English, and I sort of stepped in and said, I've been looking at this for music education, but some of the other threads were talking about threshold concepts generally, as in it happens in, in science, for example. These are the threshold concepts. I think that's a very limited way of thinking about things. And to bring in Harvey Goldstein, who had a wonderful quote, I think you'll find it's a bit more complicated than that. I think that's a very useful quote here. So the idea is that, yes, okay, there might be sort of generic threshold concepts within a subject, but of course we cannot guarantee that that individual learners may not experience more or indeed less threshold concepts as they are learning. And of course, what I'm saying here, and this is definitely one of the things that links to my doctoral research, is, well, there are links here with formative assessment. So just to sort of be clear here, my sort of position, of course, in the UK, we tend to build up our definition from Paul Black and Dylan William, who defined formative assessment as all those activities undertaken by teachers and or their students to modify teaching and learning activities in which they are engaged. So what that sort of means to me is that formative assessment is a process. Of course, that means working with the student so they know where they are in their learning, where they're going to, and equally importantly, how they're going to get there. So bringing that in terms of the research then, and what this, the idea of threshold concepts might look in composing. I've got some examples from some of the research that I've done. I just want to share with you some of the schools that I've been using for my research here. So I've got here, I'll call it School A, and that was a group of Year 9 students. There was a focus group, even though I was also looking at the other students too in the class. But School A was a Year 9 group, and their composing task was to compose a piece of music in any style, but it's got to be built around the rondo form. There was School B, that's a Year 8 group, and they were asked to compose a rap or a song or both if they wanted, again following the rondo form, but they had to include the chords C, D, F and G, majors, as well as lyrics. And the final school, School C, that was a Year 7 group, and that was to create a short piece in ternary form based on an ostinato. Then the ostinato could be rhythmic or it could be melodic, and they're asked also to think carefully about how the elements of music, how they might be used effectively. So those were the composition tasks for these particular students. Now, in terms of the sorts of things that I saw from my data, so this is from School A. So what I identified here as a threshold concept was establishing a clear starting point for the students' group composing. So just to picture the scene, again, I was looking at this from the video recorded data. So what I saw was that the group was struggling to decide on what style they would choose their rondo piece to be in. So even though it was free choice, their starting point, they just didn't know how to start that composition because they'd been given that sort of freedom there. So the starting point was a threshold concept. However, to cross that threshold, and this I thought was quite clever, is that one student in the group took it upon themselves to use their mobile phone, which in this particular school was fine, and they looked up some examples of pieces of music they might have wanted to explore in terms of style on YouTube. So what actually happened then, so the group collectively listened to this piece of music or these pieces of music for inspiration, had a bit of a chat about it. That was the sort of formative assessment aspect. And that sort of process, using that tool and that sort of dialogue, through doing that, they're able to cross the threshold. They then decided on the style of piece that they wanted to write in, and then went away and did their composing. But the point was, in this particular example, without that important tool, it may have been quite a while before the students were actually able to have the assistance of the teacher in order to cross that important threshold to get them started with their group composing. There was another couple actually in School A. So I would argue here there's actually two threshold concepts going on. So first of all, knowing chords, as in knowing the notes within the chord, and knowing how to be able to play the chords. Now in this one, I know myself, for example, when I used to teach Key Stage 3, well, Year 7, Year 8, because I'm in the 3-tier system, so I teach from Year 9 upwards. In terms of group composing, some students may just sort of play around, experiment with sounds, and then they'll go with those particular chords. But in this one, there was already a knowledge base from some students of the types of chords. So a student might say, for example, "Oh, play a C major chord," or "Let's do a progression from C major to F major." Now, actually, in terms of the threshold concept, there was one student who didn't know the notes of the chord, and because they didn't know the notes of the chord, weren't able to make that contribution in order to play the chord. So what actually happened here, and this again, thinking of it in terms of formative assessment, is that there was a fellow pianist who was actually playing electric guitar in this particular group, but through the use of scaffolding, this student, this electric guitar student, because he had a knowledge base of piano and chords, he was able to support the other student in being able to model, okay, well, this is a C major chord, or this then goes to F major, etc. But again, the point is, without that support, that individual student within that group might not have been able to have crossed that threshold and overcome his learning barrier. So as I say here, that the modelling as this formative assessment strategy offered by this other student meant that actually this individual student was able to make a valuable contribution to the group's composition. Otherwise, there may have been a situation where he just sat there and he may not have done anything. And again, that might not have been spotted by the teacher unless they were going around doing the rounds for feedback. So on to school B then. So another one here in terms of a starting point, but this one was in terms of lyric writing. So one of the things that I said before was they had to not only write a song or rap, but lyrics were very much at the heart of it. Now, what was interesting here for this particular group is that, and this was over about 5 weeks thereabouts, so one lesson a week over 5 weeks, is that a significant amount of their composing time, so about 50% per lesson, was taken up by simply the group just discussing what would go in their piece and how they would start. So all the other musical aspects, were sort of being neglected, and trying to put those things together just wasn't happening. They spent a lot of time trying to work out what their starting point was for their lyric writing. Now, as part of my research, I also spoke to the students in the post-study interview, and what they said, the reason why they found this so difficult was that they weren't given a topic. They didn't know what they wanted to do. They couldn't make those decisions, even though weeks were progressing. They just didn't know what to do, and they said, "Well, it's just hard to sit down and do it." And what was really interesting was that the teacher said, "Well, you want the kids to struggle a little bit, and then being able to provide them with that challenge in order to overcome that struggle." But the problem here is actually the students didn't have the necessary tools in able to meet that particular threshold and get themselves started. So what happened, and this is also interesting what the teacher said, this is a sort of direct quote here. She said, the group sort of lost their way with it, and they would become off task quickly. So then she would have to step in and get them back on task. But the point is that even though the teacher had identified that behaviour had become a problem, it was actually identifying the threshold concept of actually getting started with the lyric writing that would have been the thing that students might have gotten themselves going with it. So how could this have been problematized? Well, in the post-study interview, it was interesting that the teacher said, well, they just needed more time. They just needed more time to work in group and sit and talk about it. What was more insightful, however, in terms of trying to cross this particular threshold, was the student said, well, we could have done with some examples of previous compositions from previous year groups, but also they talked about, having model examples from YouTube, which actually links very nicely to what had happened in School A. So in other words, having the tools as model examples in order for them to be able to cross these particular thresholds. And unfortunately, this was at the end of the academic year for their year. So unfortunately, even though a composition was submitted, students didn't cross. I'm talking at whole class level here. Students didn't cross that particular threshold. So in terms of their next musical journey, in terms of starting year 9, actually the crossing the threshold of lyric writing was still very much an issue to be addressed. And finally, in terms of school C, so moving from the students here and actually talking about the teachers, so the potential for creating threshold concepts. What was really interesting here that I found was that during a sequence of 5 lessons again, of composing lessons, this particular focus group didn't appear to encounter any threshold concepts whatsoever. They just got on with it and they did it. And the piece of music that they produced was pretty good. Now, actually, I think that this has a particular importance with teacher practice here. So a key question for us as reflective practitioners, of course, is, well, okay, what opportunities might there have been for this particular group to be further challenged? In other words, what opportunities were there for creating suitable threshold concepts with necessary support that the learners could cross in going through their musical journey? Now, in this particular group, I just want to make it absolutely clear that, you know, in this context, I'm not saying that the group didn't advance themselves as skills musicians and that they didn't get better. What I'm merely suggesting as a potential for a threshold concept here from the teacher level is, was it perhaps a missed opportunity that actually a threshold concept or series of threshold concepts weren't actually created for this particular group, who just seemed to, you know, get on with things without any problems whatsoever? And so as part of my research, I've started to come up with a working model in terms of identifying crossing threshold concepts. So there's the diagram there on the right-hand side. So what I've done here, starting at the top, and I've identified what I'm calling at the moment a core concept. So for example, lyric writing would be a core concept, and that core concept could then be transferred into other units of work. And then moving towards down the bottom here, you will see I've identified prior knowledge. So a key thing here for the teacher is, well, okay, what prior knowledge do the students already have in order, you know, are the students actually ready for lyric writing? Do they need strategies? Do I need to teach them something in order to make sure that they are ready to take on that particular challenge? And then, of course, then from prior knowledge, we get on with the threshold concepts themselves. So, for example, you know, is it a starting point that could be a threshold concept? Once they've got their choice of words, how does it then fit with the melody that they're then going to go on and write? Again, do they have the tools in order to be able to work with that effectively? And then I go on to what I'm calling at the minute, it's obstacles, which is shaded in a slightly lighter colour, just simply because these things may not occur, but of course they might. And some of these things also are beyond the teacher's control in some cases. So for example, obstacles might be, well, group dynamics, disruptive behaviour of groups, teacher or learner absence. You know, if the teacher's away and it's only one period a week, of course, that's going to have an impact. Meeting specific learning needs. What about learning resources or equipment? Time constraints is a big one, of course, and you know, lack of sufficient tools, for example, model examples. So those are the sorts of things that might get in the way of having those threshold concepts crossed, and then leading to what I'm calling at the minute a core concept, an overarching concept. And finally, of course, formative assessment. So, you know, even though we might try and cross these threshold concepts, that's probably going to be unlikely if these obstacles get in the way and if we don't problematize them. So that's the sort of working model that I'm thinking of in terms of threshold concepts at the moment, based on some of the research that I've seen. And just to summarize then, there's some considerations for teachers when planning composing tasks. So first one is, well, what prior knowledge do students already possess that will enable them to make up an effective start of their composing journey? But of course, also what formative assessment strategies might they require in supporting their generation of ideas as a starting point? And of course, then, you know, as a starting point before, you know, in terms of the planning process, you know, for some groups, maybe some individuals, well, what new threshold concepts might learners be challenged with? And of course, what formative assessment strategies might they require in order to support themselves with that? So that's the planning stage before students have started the composing journey. So what about organising the composing groups then? Well, okay, so what extent are the individual learners working within groups? To what extent are they able to support each other, like in the example that I showed for School B? So of course, that's in addition to the teacher. Now, of course, we can't be everywhere all the time. So in terms of a group work and the makeup of groups, which I know is a separate presentation, but what sort of dynamics are going in there so students can actually be learning resources for each other during the composing process? And then finally, of course, you know, when the teacher's going around and giving feedback on the in-process composing, so what additional threshold concepts might be created for some learners? And again, what formative assessment structures might they require in order to support them with this? Okay, so hopefully that's been very useful. It's a very, very quick overview of things I've been working. Like I say, there's very little of it, next to nothing in terms of music education, and for what I've seen, nothing in composing. So yeah, so thank you ever so much. Like I say, if you want to get in touch, I'm always happy to discuss these things further. And yeah, like I say, thanks ever so much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Well, that's quite a lot of information to take in there. I think that at this stage we should take a short break. So I'm going to suggest, just looking at the time, I suggest that we reconvene at 15 minutes past 5. So go and just stretch your legs and get a glass of water and then come back. And then we're going to get much more practical after the break. We're going to hear from Mark, the other Mark, about his curriculum, and we're going to hear from Ali and sort of do some thinking about our own curricula and how we might be able to apply some of the thinking that we've experienced so far today. So enjoy your cups of tea. See you shortly. So I hope everybody's come back from their little break, and welcome everybody back to the second half. I'm very pleased to introduce Mark Aitchison, who made the mistake in the last session back in February of speaking out and going, oh, I've got something I could share. So Mark's, well, you can introduce yourself, Mark, but Mark is a teacher, and he is going to share with him his curriculum that he does in school and how he's structured it so that his pupils can make progress as composers. It's nice. It's really nice after some quite heavy theory to have some practical examples. So over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Judith. Just to give you some context, I'm head of music at Droitwich High School. I became head of music during lockdown, having been there for 18 months. This is the end of my third year, but I've only been head of music just about a year now. We've rewritten the curriculum and then rewritten the curriculum for lockdown, and in September we get to rewrite the curriculum again for being in the classroom. So it's all a bit of a mishmash. So Mark Phillips and Martin Foltley have stolen most of what I was going to say, so I will flip through this very quickly. This is basically how we've seen it in school, in that because I've taught early years and Key Stage 2 as well. Key Stage 1 and 2 is all about exploring ideas, and then at Key Stage 3 we get more complicated in group work to eventually in year 11 they're doing it all by themselves, not the song. And this is the national curriculum that you can all find, and I'll share these later. I won't read them because there's no time. So this is what I've done in Key Stage 2 in the past. We're a high school, so we have 2 middle schools. We teach year 7 in one of the middle schools, not the other. We have all of year 8 for year 8, and then they make an option at the end of year 8 to go into music or drop it. And then they make another option choice at the end of year 9 to do either our vocational course or a GCSE. So we actually, sadly, only get 1 year of proper Key Stage 3, but we teach the year 7s as if they're in our school, in the school we're at, and we teach our year 9s as we teach a normal year 9, but there's considerably less of them because we have almost 300 a year group. So in year 8, in year 6 and 7 in the past, I've introduced things like drones, pentatonic scales, pedal notes, binary and ternary form, and all of that kind of thing. And what I've built up doing is we teach them, I use the Kadai method a lot, and I teach using the Kadai method, and they love the hand signals. So I teach Amazing Grace and a Chinese boat song, both pentatonic scales. We start by teaching them using the hand signals, and then they learn to create their own drones and ostinato patterns using the same pentatonic patterns, using the hand signals in groups. And then as they perform them, we sing the song over the top to see how it works. So that's how we kind of introduce a bit of composition there. And we do a bit of samba for rhythm. We use rhythm clocks and introduce rhythmic notation and things like that. Then we get to Key Stage 3. And what we do is we introduce the primary chords. So we do that in year 7 with blues. They arrive at us at the start of year 8. So we do blues again straight away, but introducing the bass guitar, acoustic guitar, all guitars and drum kit. And then we move that straight into a little bit of reggae as well. So they introduce hooks and riffs. And while we're teaching, so we teach them to perform, say, the hooks and the riffs of Three Little Birds, and then they have to create their own riffs and chords, own riffs and hooks, based on the chord structure of Three Little Birds, mirroring what the original band did, but creating their own, so that they learn to create little ideas and little riffs that they then put together, and then they accompany the whole school, the whole class performing. So the class will perform the melody by singing, and then each group then has created their own little backing track based on their own hooks and riffs to mimic what Bob Marley had done. And they really enjoy doing that sort of stuff. Unfortunately, I haven't got any recordings of that to play you because we did it in lockdown. So we're in classrooms without musical instruments. But then what we've done instead is we've introduced Band Lab, which we've done this time during lockdown. And they've started to learn to use Band Lab, but they're going to create their own backing tracks to these songs using the ideas that we've got. And if you see down the bottom of my slide, that's basically what we've done. So we've got the chord progression, we create our own bass riffs, we teach them how to create a simple melodic line just using 2 or 3 notes that they repeat over and over, and explore melodic variations that way. So that's what we do in year 8. And then for film music, we just teach them how to create their own leitmotifs for various characters using the I Can Compose series that Rachel does. Oops. So this is what we do in year 8. In year 8, they learn to play the Superman theme, Hedwig's theme, Star Wars title theme, all of those. And we talk about how those are created. They learn to play them. They learn how to play them with different articulations and things like that to get some real good expression going in there on the old keyboard. And then we teach them the Duel of Fates from Star Wars. And this is something I've been teaching. I started using this on my PGC way back last century when the film first came out. And it's basically got 2 contrasting ostinatos that develop from each other. One uses long notes, one uses short notes, one's smooth, one's staccato, all of that sort of thing. And then we look at the Batman one, which has a low-pitched ascending bass ostinato with a contrasting high-pitched bell. So in year 8, they learn to perform those, and then they learn to create them, and they do it this way. So what I did with year 9 in lockdown this time is we used, this is from the I Can Compose. You'll probably recognize the screenshots that I blatantly stole for my PowerPoint for the year 9s. And I told them what they could use, what they couldn't use, because what I was listening to Howard Goodall on the MTA podcast yesterday, and he said that the thing when he listens back to his compositions from when he was in school was they lacked structure because they didn't have enough of the structure. So I really give them a very tight structure because then they don't really go wrong, and that helps them build their confidence. So they create a couple of leitmotifs and things like that. And then we go on, and if I pull that one, if I get those out of the way for now. So this is how they create their first part of the piece. They create their ostinatos, drone, pentatonic. So we've chosen our notes from the first one. Then they go and they steal the hero leitmotifs that they'd already created, and we copy and paste and put them in. So there you can see a screenshot of what I'd created to show them. and then we develop by adding the texture. And this is, I'll just play it for you. I don't think you can see that. So here is a composition of a Year 9 girl done in lockdown. Let me know if you can hear it. Oh, there we go. It's on its way. No, it's not playing. Oh. No, it's not having it. I knew this would happen. Anyway, so I will play that later on for you. Yeah, so then we go on to Key Stage 4. So in Key Stage 3, they've learned about chord progressions, just the primary chords. In Year 9, we start to introduce the secondary chords, and by Year 10, they're on extended chords, so we add in sevenths and things like that. We've done lots of things around, we do major scales in Year 8 and 9 and in Year 7. So basically in Year 7, we do everything in C major. In Year 8, everything's either in G or F or moving into D major. And then by Year 10, everything is in B flat major and E flat major, just to really complicate them, because our students on the keyboard like sharp keys and they hate anything in a flat key. That's maybe because they're all string players like I am. So we develop their ideas as we go on and add more complex time signatures and things like that. And then this is how we get them to start to write songs. So this should work. This is some work that our Year 9s and 10s have done. So the things on the left are what we do in Year 10. So this is an example of a Year 10 piece of work. They're really short. We give them, they've got to create a 8-bar chord progression with 8 chords in it using the primary and secondary chords. Then they create a bass riff and then they add a backing rhythm. And this is one example. And that's a student in Year 9, and this is another one. And to do that, we've done lots of playing around with the primary chords. Every time we've played a song, we explore the primary chords and secondary chords, and we talk about them. So we're always reinforcing what they do. And then when we get to Year 10, this is an example of a boy he's put in the chords and then he's played the guitar over the top. Okay, so what we've done there is we taught them that to use 2 or 3 notes or 4 notes and just swap them around and try them in different ways. But the idea happens repeatedly. And then to develop that, because this is their songwriting project, once they've done that, they then have to add lyrics and sing. So they've created their melody. They then create their lyrics. We talk about that, and we do a lot of work around creating lyrics and rhythm for lyrics. And then this is one of my students. And again, this has all been done during lockdown, so I wasn't face to face with them. This is them doing it and sending it me and me messaging them back. And this is one of my students who was brave enough to say, yes, you can play it, sir. what she's done there is she did the chords that we did. We discussed the chords. She created her chord pattern. She created a bass line that she liked. She created the melody that she liked using a keyboard on real-time input. And then she went away and she sung that she's recorded it using her phone into Soundtrap, using the melody she'd already created. So because students often get to, if you say go and write a melody with lyrics, they'll get really confused. So we wrote the melody first and then said write some lyrics to go with your melody and then try and work out how it fits. And I think she's done quite a good job there. That is attempt number 1, which I'm quite proud of really for her, because she's a very timid and shy young lady. And then this is the last bit really. This is how we develop our film music from Key Stage 3. And I do hope this works, because this is a pretty awesome one. We go on and we talk about, so in year 9, we've looked at pentatonic into major minor scales. In year 10, I do a lot around diminished scales and diminished chords. How to use chords so that they become accents in film music, or something to help it become really sonorous and scary. The use of pedal notes and drones, and how to do melody doubling ideas, which I have taught in year 9, but that one didn't play. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second, and then I'll pull this up.
Yes, and I'm going to chip in, Adam, Mark, and just say if this can be the last thing.
Yeah, this is the last thing.
That's perfect.
So I'll share my screen again, and I hope this works. And if this doesn't work, we finished. So there we go. Move that out of the way. No, it's not playing now. Oh, it's not playing. So you can see my screen here, and it's not playing for some reason. So this student had taken his ideas. He started with his melody in the major, and we used the mother theme. It starts in the major, went to the minor here, and by the time he got it in here, he used the diminished scale, so it really, really worked. And I'm really annoyed that it's not playing.
Maybe we can make a sound file and embed it on the website, and then people can hear it.
Yeah, I'll do that, and I'll embed them in the PowerPoint, and I'll share the PowerPoint that way.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. It's great to hear an example of a real life working curriculum, and especially to implement that in lockdown as well. That's quite something. Okay, I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to hand straight over to Ali Daubney, who is here somewhere. And Ali, you've got till the end of the session now. So great. Welcome, Ali. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Ali Daubney. I work a lot with Martin, and I was involved in teacher education for 12 years at Sussex until last year, Sussex University. So I'm really interested in composing. My PhD was in composing and processes on composing. You can imagine how annoyed I was when I got halfway through and then found this guy called Faultley kind of beating me to it. His work went off in one direction, and my PhD then went in a slightly different direction. But actually, it was really good to have that there to kind of look at. So that was with Key Stage 3 teachers and the processes of composing, but around assessment and what it was that they did. And I was kind of quite fascinated by that. Still am. And there were lots of things that I've heard today that I'm going to pick up on. Judith, I'm not sure if I'm able to share my screen. If you can sort that for me, I'll just put a few things up in a second. Martin talked at the beginning about the 7-ness of 7, the 9-ness of 9, and those kind of things, and what you hear. And I was obviously always interested to hear what Mark said, and I want to unpick that slightly in relation to where we're going to go with the final activity, which is something that we can all do together. Mark talked about the constructive, technical and expressive elements, which I think are important, but I think there are other things that we have to make sure that whilst we've got those in our minds, they're not necessarily things that we are, that becomes the be all and the end all of our focus. And then we went into talking about some threshold concepts, which again, I was really interested to hear about. I'm sorry, I cribbed his slide as we went along. If that's allowed or not, but anyway, it's here. I hope you can see it. So he talked about technical, constructive and expressive, the control of the sound, interrelated dimensions, understanding notations, those kind of things, and increasing sophistication, and all of those things that kind of came with it. But the thing that was kind of in my head, and I think is what we've just really heard from Mark, that it's a balance and a tension, and it doesn't need to be, but we've got to have knowledge, which includes skills, but we've also got to have creativity. Now, I think it was Helen talked about that GCSE composition conundrum, and it having this kind of creative, original, innovative flair, but technically, it didn't stack up. And then I was thinking, well, if you listen to half the music I really like, how would it stack up in relation to criteria? So criteria are all very well, and it's the same with Key Stage 3, how we construct our curriculum. But if we restrain ourselves to thinking about constructive, technical and expressive, we've actually got to kind of think wider than that potentially. When we were talking about threshold concepts, it reminded me there was a teacher who was training at Sussex a few years ago, and they do a research project at the end, which I think BCU still have as well. And this teacher was thinking about informal learning and composing and the kind of band idea, putting things together. But he realised very quickly that just chucking in a room with some instruments just wasn't going to work, and that you needed to put the structure in, and he couldn't be everywhere at once. And so his thing about threshold concepts, he didn't call them that at all, but it was like the mysteries, if you like, that he had to think about in advance, about what stones might need to be turned over by certain pupils. And so he came up with this scheme that we talked about of putting things in envelopes in different places. And if they were really stuck, they could go and pick up this envelope or that envelope, and there might be an idea, or they kind of turn something over and it might say, try playing it backwards, or give you a new creative idea. So there was lots of different things, but there were also really practical things to access the knowledge that you might need at that point. So those threshold concepts in different ways. But he was thinking about this idea of knowledge and creativity kind of coming together. Now, what I wanted to focus on this afternoon, and the bit of time we've got remaining though, is a statement from Ofsted. So I've just done a quick plug, actually. Martin and I have just done 6 hours of filming things for the National College, which have just gone up. So there's 3 for primary, 3 for secondary. And one of the things we looked at in the middle of one of the sessions, the middle session, was around composing. And I was looking at this statement here from Ofsted. And in 2005, they said, in most cases, too little time, so there's a time factor, is spent experimenting, so that's part of the process, sketching out ideas, part of the process, inventing new sound blends. I started thinking, well, this came from Key Stage 3, but actually kids are doing this, small kids are doing this all the time. They're experimenting, they're sketching out ideas, they're inventing new sound blends, they're sitting on the floor with those saucepans and playing them in different ways with those wooden spoons. Putting them into patterns, mixing them, expanding them, putting them into structures, recording, storing. I didn't underline storing, but it's quite important. But I'm interested today, I suppose, in the process part of it. And they said the results show too little that moves pupils from copying the style suggested to them to work that demonstrates originality, initiative, or experiment. And this perhaps links together some of these things that we've talked about today, like, for example, the child that had the originality and the initiative and the experiment, but didn't have the other things that ticked the boxes, the things that Mark was talking about just now with all the processes and the processes that they go through. So what I've done, and I hope this is okay, I'm going to come back to that in a second. I've picked up a Padlet, and I'll put the link into the chat box for us. If I can get you back on my screen. There we are. Judith, I've also sent it to you because I can't get my chat box back because I'm sharing my screen. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I can't do that either. So if you can stop that for me, it's all gone a bit pear-shaped, technologically speaking. Right, and if we go to the chat box, which is here, I'm just going to put this link up, and it's a Padlet link, okay? So if you click on the Padlet, you won't have to log in. It's already set up. And it should look like a wall with lots of graffiti on it. And I kind of like the idea of that, because I think composing can be gloriously messy, but it also can be quite structured. So it's got lines, and it's got colours and mixes of colours and all sorts of things you do. And so what I've done is I've put up here what they said. Hopefully you can see that. And it says exactly that quote. Since we've got a lot of teachers here today, and I think I'd really like to hear everybody's voices. I wondered whether you can, if you press the add button on my screen on the Mac, it's in the bottom right corner. If I click on it, I can put in something about any of these things. So something practical to share with somebody else about any of these things I do. So for example, I might say about experimenting. One of my favorite things that I really like doing, can't even spell today, is about musical snowballs. So no matter what the age, especially in primary school after break time, I give them a small musical snowball, a kind of crystal idea, and they've got 30 seconds in a little group to go and put something, do something with that sound, and there's like real energy and excitement. And then we put the two sounds together and we make that into something, and you can grow the snowball depending on how much time you've got. But if you want to add in your own ideas, so in other words, Judith asked me to do a session, and really I'm just throwing it back to you, to put in any ideas you want about any of these things, or any of the other things we've actually picked up today about experimenting, sketching out ideas, inventing new sounds, patterns, mixing, structures, recording, things about, you know, one of the things that teachers are always asking in sessions is about, well, where do you store your recording? So if you've got any gems of things that you want to put on, somebody's here we go, and we're off. Having confidence, building confidence. Does your composition have X, Y, Z? Then it is good composition. Does it limit creativity? Yes. There's a real chicken and egg thing there. If I tell them it's going to sound like this. There was a project done by David Hargreaves and his team got a few years ago where they looked at children always trying to find the right answer. And so because it was the answer, the right answer was of course the one the teacher wanted and the one that the teacher wanted to hear. And it was around art and music, and I think possibly dance as well. And if you tell them it's got to have this recipe, that's what they'll go away and do. But is that going to take away some of these other things? It's being updated and updated and updated, which is very lovely. Start with listening. The listening can be your listening, you know, your music. It can be somebody else's music. It can be a minute of listening and the ideas that spark from that. And I'm aware that we've probably got primary and secondary people here today, and the ways that you do those things. And the snowball idea is if you can take tiny sounds from those, and they can take their own sounds and they can do little things with them. Confidence, that double-edged sword. Confidence. I think his name is Russ Harris, The Confidence Gap. It's a good thing to go away and read. Somebody's put lovely ideas here. Experimenting, somebody uses Midsummer Night's Dream. Improvisation, good way for students to feel the students' natural musicality. One of the things that I was looking at in my PhD was how improvisation was used, and the answer from quite a lot of the, I did systematic observation and some interviews, and the answer was pretty much, oh, in year 8 we do the blues, and there's a bit of improvising in there, and then year 9 we do something else. But actually improvising is such a strong way into composing. And it always makes me wryly smile when teachers go, oh, they've got all the way to year 10 and they don't know how to compose. It's like, no, but they've been in school for 10 years. So we need to teach them these things along the way. Still being updated. And I thought what we do is we'd randomly pick a couple in a minute and see if, because they're all anonymously, see if anybody would like to own up to any of them. And talk about what they can do. The confidence thing, I was listening to what Mark Aitchison was talking about, and how there was success built in. So it builds confidence when it sounds decent and there's some success built into it to give them that confidence. However, on the other hand, there are other times when I'm sure you let them make mistakes and try things out and work out for themselves, and those kind of things. So It's just been updated. I'm going to give it 30 more seconds to put up some more ideas, and then we're going to pick some of them and let some people talk about some of these. Where should we start? Maybe we can have some volunteers. Somebody's put up, Mark Phillips used the phrase incrementally sequenced in his talk. What does this mean in composing at Key Stage 3? And that's a really interesting question, because if we go down the line of saying this is all about picking out this element of music, that element of music, the other element of music, he talked about us effectively putting those in silos. And I think that's, for me, where the 6-ness of 6 and the 7-ness of 7 and the 9-ness of 9 comes in, and what it is that you're trying to do doesn't really matter effectively what the style or genre or tradition of music, if you've sorted out what the skills are. But we have to remember, I thought that was you, Martin. I just knew it. And I think that would be such an interesting thing to pick up when we've got more than 12 minutes remaining. But I'm sure that incrementally sequenced thing will come up in some of the things that we're going to talk about here. Does somebody want to pick up on the point that they made about fine line with modelling and then copying rather than being your own creative little selves? Who put that up that we might think about? Any volunteers? No. Think it talks about here about being quite brave to do their own ideas, thinking they risk getting it wrong, and that's where you need so many different strategies. I mean, I used to take the trainees when I was teaching at Sussex, used to take them into school and do composing activities with the kids and sort of model a lot of things and get them to try them. And one of the things that we talked about a lot and tried out was this kind of idea of a creative mass of noise. And so how you get people to do something when everybody else is there and you shut down into your own little bubble. So it might be a kind of mind the gap activity, so that you do something together and then there's a big gap where you just do the thing on your own, but you're not saying, Judith, you do it now, Nancy, you do it now. Everybody's making that same noise at the same time. And then after your 12 bars or whatever, you go back to what everybody was doing before, because that builds confidence. And if we were doing a kind of songwriting thing, or fitting in words or whatever, then everybody's got those kind of gaps that they can fill in. Does somebody want to pick up something on praise? Somebody put up something about praise, which I think, hey, there's a hand up. Can we take the hand, Julie?
Sorry, it's Nancy.
Sorry, I wasn't responding to your last comment. Something I found really useful with children is around sort of mind mapping and possibility thinking. Yeah. So, and sometimes with instruments, but often without instruments, just having that time before. I mean, the example I can give is about a project I did around rain, a workshop around rain, and just getting them to think of as many words about rain, as many images of rain, as many feelings of rain, and getting that all there, and even then starting to think about sounds of rain. And then it's a kind of massive resource bank for the children to go back to. And it also means that no one child is without some ideas to take forward. So that's one I've used quite a lot.
That's a really nice one as well. And in the thing that Martin and I have just done, we picked out some things for people to think about. And one of the things was about how do you put in planning time, and putting the instruments on the floor and getting them to plan out what they're going to do without actually touching them, and all of those kind of things. Or things about variation and putting all the ideas with what do different things look like. We all live in different houses, our house looks slightly different, and using imagery in the way that you would, because I think for a child, filling up, this is a bit of space, fill it with sound. We have to give them lots and lots of new starting points. Andrea, do you want to put your mic on and talk us through your point, if you're happy to do that?
Yeah, I'll just find the point. I'm trying to work through the two different screens here. So, what the point? What I wanted to say, or what I wrote?
Yeah, what you wrote, or what you want to say.
Well, just moving on from what was literally just said there by Nancy as well. We use pictures quite a lot, and they'll analyse the pictures in English. I call it in English, and then so they'll write what they see, what they think they might hear in that environment, how they think that picture makes them feel, and then they translate those words into music. So if they write relaxing, we'll have a discussion on, well, how does relaxing sound? How can you create a relaxing piece of music? And that then leads to dynamics, to tempos, to smooth melodies or not smooth melodies and things like that. So we analyze the picture in English. Then when they come to sort of start in their piece of music, they've already got a piece of paper that says, well, it needs to be quiet, it needs to be this, it needs to be that. So a lot of the decisions are there that they've already discussed and come up with.
Yeah, and it's also a bit like what Nancy was saying with generating lots of ideas, that there's ideas for people to go back to and all of those things. It was interesting you picked up on the feeling thing in there, because I think if you go down the route of constructive, technical, expressive, feeling can get quite lost. And you might argue that that's part of expressive, but it becomes quite technical occasionally. Nancy?
Yeah, I think also it is actually, I like what you're saying about how you move from the kind of the words and the images and things, but sometimes it can be quite difficult for children, the younger ones, to go from those words to sounds, and sometimes some bridging and support needs to go on there, I think.
Oh yeah. That's not where we stop. That's just sort of the springboard.
Yeah.
Everything just comes from there.
And presumably that's your secondary, aren't you, Andrea?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think also, like, brilliant things with mark making and all of that kind of thing, where you take words, or you take music and you turn it into words, and then you take it back into music, and then big pieces of art, and you can put picture frames around and take a little bit of that, and so using words in lots of different ways. But again, it all comes back to the same as the threshold concepts. It's got to be a teacher with a really good radar, wandering around, knowing where they need to be and what might happen and how they do something. And what I always find fascinating is with trainee teachers, how little exposure, even though we've had a national curriculum now for quite a long time, and composing's been part of that, how little exposure a lot of trainee teachers, music teachers, have had to composing whilst they focus on other aspects. And I always say to them, the first year I was teaching, I made one of everything. So I was doing something with the kids and I was asking them to do it, I did it myself. The same if they're not confident about singing, sing a song out loud every day, so doing those things for yourself and actually being playful and messy with musical ideas. But that's linked to our own values, but particularly to our behaviours and our own habits, which is great. Is there another one on there to pick up? I've just lost it off my, oh, here we are, off my screen. Somebody talked about hooks and riffs, actually. I don't know if somebody wants to talk about that one, because that's obviously a very practical idea, which sounds great. Any hands?
Is that Catherine? Can't hear you, Catherine.
Hello, Catherine. It's that famous I'm on mute part.
Yeah, she's not on mute, but we can't hear her.
Oh.
Maybe unplug your headphones, maybe?
Is that any better?
Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much. Such an interesting session. Finding it so helpful to kind of unpick thinking in such a thorny area. I was just thinking about that idea of the kind of the sound where and the fill the gap moment is something I've been talking to teachers quite a lot about at the moment, because they are observing that their students are coming back after lockdown being a lot more reticent to share and to put themselves forward in front of the class, because they're just less used to that. I saw a really good example from drama where the teachers were saying, actually, we're not going to get kids up at the front to perform. We're doing that kind of moment where they spotlight all at the same time and all doing work side by side. I'm seeing teachers using, musical futures resources where their kids are all looking at the front and playing at the same time. So there's less of that kind of onus on the individual. And it feels like something to be really mindful of, where we, music is sort of seen as some of the answer to well-being, but actually we need to be really mindful that actually we don't want to put people on the spot and make them feel like, that it's going to have some impact on their well-being. I don't really know where I'm going with that, but it's something that we're thinking about at the moment, and that the disposition to be expressive, that final bit of Mark's column, is is a real quite potentially fragile thing and needs quite a lot of care, and that's why the enthusiasm and motivation for the teacher is so important. So
yeah, and I think for the teacher to be part of that as well, and putting themselves there and kind of, you know, showing those behaviours. There's one other, there's lots of interesting things in there. There's one I want to pick up before my final slide, but it's on toolboxes. Who toolboxes up? Somebody want to talk about toolboxes? I mean, I think it's fairly obvious.
Hi, that was me, it's Helen. I've done it for years now. For each of the kind of, I suppose, topics, I put all the strands in of all of the different language, kind of using the whole Mad T-shirt thing, but kind of picked up really from the sort of musical vocabulary that the students needed. So I just have toolboxes up on the wall of the kind of skills and things that they're going to be learning and the skills that they'll need for that particular project and that particular topic. So yeah,
I think toolboxes can cover practical things, and they can, you know, and again, it's because you've thought it out in advance, and that's I think one of the critical things is about preempting. You know, we talk a lot about misconceptions across the curriculum, those teacher standards, don't we? You know, what are the misconceptions? But kind of knowing the things that might come up and then kind of preempting those, or being able to guide things in slightly different directions, and having, it's all about flexibility in the end. What I wanted to finish with, because I know Judith will be keen to finish on time, brings together actually something somebody was just saying about, it was what Catherine was saying, that a lot of the work that I do with my husband's a psychologist, and the work that we do together is kind of related to mental health and music, and making people feel kind of competent and feel like they are musical. And I think that that's a really important thing about the way that we have such power to make people feel musical or feel unmusical. And it doesn't matter how old they are and what experience level they have, we have that power, and we have to accept that we have that power. But I really like this from Eisner, which is about the importance of thinking artistically. And he talks about this. He says, one of the highest compliments we can pay is to call someone an artist in their own field. And to me, that doesn't matter if they're an artist who's 5 years old or 15 years old or 95 years old, and whether it's language, mathematics, science, history, or the social sciences. And he says, given the value we accord artistry in our work, we might even say a major goal for education is the preparation of artists, people who can think artistically about what they do. And maybe that's something to think about in the future. What does thinking artistically mean in this sense? Who can use their imagination, who can experience their work as it unfolds, there's your process, who can exploit the unexpected, and who can make judgments about its direction on the basis of feeling as well as rule. And he goes on to say, and I totally agree with this, it wouldn't be an outrageous goal for education. So that's all I've got to say for this afternoon, really. I'm going to pass back to you, Judith.
Thank you, Ali. That was great. Can we preserve the Padlet in some way and share it? You're on mute, but I'll take that as a yes.
I'll PDF it and send it to you.
Perfect. Thank you. Wow. So that felt very informative and very intense, actually. But yeah, really interesting session. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I know you'll all have had a long day in school, so thanks for coming at the end of the day and being with us. Just to wrap up, we have recorded this session, so it'll take my son does the editing. He's 14, so he takes a little bit of persuasion sometimes, but he will edit this for me, and we'll have it on the website. So once that's there, and once we've got everybody's presentations and so on, we'll drop you a line through the Zoom application and give you the link so that you can find all the information. What was the other thing I wanted to say? Next time, we're meeting on the 20th of April next. We're talking about equality and inclusion, and actually well-being. Music and well-being and songwriting is one of the themes that one of the presentations that we'll have. So that will pick up nicely from the conversation just then. And I'd like to give a little plug for a residential summer school that Sound and Music runs. We run a summer school for 14 to 18-year-olds. It's in August, but people apply, and the deadline for applying is coming up. So again, I shall send you a link to that. Anybody who's doing GCSE or A-level who is enjoying their composing would fit in, I'm sure, very well at the summer school. and it's free if you're on, income support and that kind of thing, if you can't afford to pay the fee. So I think that's it. Just a big thank you to everybody who's participated, and I thank you again for being here with us today. Bye.